Please help me change the paradigm of healthcare.
The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I'm the founder of Holistic Caring. We're based here in California, and we do educational programs and case management for patients on how to use cannabis therapeutically as a medicine.
We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high, hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing.
As the founder of Holistic Caring, I basically oversee the whole ship, and what we're doing is progressive education.
Cannabis actually supports all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all the neurotransmitter signaling systems that give messages to tell our body to either do something or not do something. Because the plant was prohibited, it prevented health professionals, doctors and nurses from learning about cannabis as medicine.
I want to change the paradigm of healthcare, and us paving the way into a new vanguard of medicine.
It's about education, it's about empowerment, it's about teaching people how to feel good, bridging the gap from what they're not getting from traditional medicine, utilizing different plant medicines, adaptogens, tips, tricks, hugs, and nugs of information to support and nourish the most important system in our body.
It's a lot of soul work, a lot of love, a lot of discipline, and meditation. I'm using my life work as a testimony to others to learn how they can be their own hero and then go help heal the world.
And we are, as nurses, the game changers.
Recording now. And we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the Green Nurse Podcast, Clinical Conversations Webcast, where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing. We're here to change the dialogue and stigma around what it means to feel good and be high. Hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. You deserve to feel good. We all deserve to feel good. And my name is Sherry Mack, and I'm Chief Nursing Officer of co-founder of Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse and Vice President of Bloom Hemp CBD. And the Green Nurse Podcast, Clinical Conversations, came about when Nurse Elisabeth and I merged our companies, Holistic Caring and the Green Nurse, alongside of Bloom Hemp, creating Holistic Caring Network. Clinical Conversations explores all aspects of how to optimize cannabis as medicine. We have a saying, people are making great medicines, people are selling these amazing plant formulations, yet no one is truly interpreting how to use cannabis as medicine, and that is what we do. Yes. So cannabis nursing has been recognized as a specialty, and nurses are truly making an impact on advocating for the safe therapeutic use of cannabis by teaching on the endocannabinoid system and how to optimize cannabis as medicine for health, healing, and wellness purposes. In recent years, the wellness community has experienced a surge of interest in Ayurveda, the ancient holistic practice of health known as the science of life. A fundamental principle of Ayurveda is the use of plants and herbs, including cannabis and CBD, to foster healing and promote overall wellness. Today's guest is not only a certified cannabis clinician, but also a board-certified Ayurvedic wellness counselor, certified yogi, and Reiki practitioner. And I want to welcome Jo Tanbrook to our Clinical Conversations webcast and give thanks and gratitude for the beautiful newsletter and blog that she wrote for us on November Healing on Ayurveda. We have a new blog coming out on Monday about some recipes that Jo has actually created for us on the 25th. So stay tuned for that blog. And Jo was just recently on my podcast sharing her compelling story of healing and what brought her to cannabis and Ayurvedic medicine. So Joe will be presenting slides. Elisabeth and I will wrap up our offerings and we'll end with Q&A with Joe answering questions. So this webinar and clinical conversation is proudly being sponsored by Bloom Hemp CBD. So Bloom Hemp is a woman and nurse-owned and operated CBD emporium dedicated to quality, safety, and patient-centered care. The diverse range of organic CBD products were originally formulated by an Ayurvedic medical doctor and are symptom targeted. Additionally, Bloom Hemp CBD offers a free nurse line and a complimentary email care plans that include product recommendations and lifestyle tips. Thank you so much, Bloom Hemp, for sponsoring the show today. And Elisabeth, we are going to pull up the slides for Joe to get started.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience real quick. And
yes,
there we go.
So clinical conversations, Ayurveda and CBD. Elisabeth and I are hosting, and we have a presenter, Joe Tanberg, Ayurvedic wellness counselor, certified yogi instructor, etc. Okay, Joe, take it away. It's all yours.
Hello.
Thanks, Sherry and Elisabeth. Yeah, so I'm Joe Tanberg, Joanna Tanberg, and as Sherry just introduced, I'm a practitioner of Ayurveda and also yoga, and a CBD or cannabis clinician. So I've been practicing these different modalities along with other things with herbs, essential oils, breath work, meditation, for almost 20 years, and this is from a long journey of healing on my own. So we'll get started. So the beginning of these slides are just a little bit of an introduction of who I am. There's my name, so you can see it spelled. I did my training with Kerala Ayurveda, which is one of the oldest schools in the world. It's based in Kerala, India. I was fortunate because of my lifestyle as a mom at the time to be able to train in the United States with teachers from Kerala that came to the Seattle, LA, and San Francisco region. So that's where my training was from. So a little bit about me, and some of you may have heard this with the podcast last week, so I won't go into such a deep dive as I did last time, but I spent the first 15 to 20 years of my life struggling with Crohn's disease. So those of you that are nurses in the medical field, I'm sure you have experience with patients that have struggled through those issues. I was diagnosed as a teenager. I was immediately put on immunosuppressant drugs. I was told that this was a disease that was incurable, that would likely someday kill me, or at least be the demise that I would find myself, and that there was no cure. So no cause, no cure was what I was told, and that this is just the way it's going to be. You're on pharmaceuticals, you won't be able to eat very well for the rest of your life, and they gave me all of these restrictions. And that was pretty depressing as a college sophomore. So I came home from college and spent some time healing for a very short period. I lived in the South in Georgia. I didn't have a ton of choices on how to find alternative methods to help me. This was also, I'm going to age myself, but this was in 1991. So this is before we had the internet. This is before we had cell phones. This is before, we were still going to bookstores and libraries to get our information. And so I started spending quite a bit of time, which wasn't the easiest thing to do when you're living in the deep South. I was living outside Savannah and splitting my time in Atlanta. And then eventually found myself in Louisville, Kentucky. So I just kind of was in these southern states. I had various gastroenterologists that I was working with as a patient, and city after city, hospital after hospital, I was literally given the exact same information verbatim, same drug choices, same outcome, and same dismal chance. Really, it didn't look so good. And this was a disease that did run in my family. So I had some information already. I had an understanding kind of, because my dad had been struggling with this for most of since I was about 10. So it was something that I was familiar with, but we had a very different version of the disease. And as many people know, because Crohn's disease is a digestive disorder disease of the full body. So from the tongue to the anus, it can affect anywhere in those areas, if not all. Most of my issues were in my lower intestines, my small intestine, and the valve where we connect to the colon. So I dealt mostly with pain every time I ate, for the most part. I dealt with weakness, emaciation, skin issues, hair loss, and just kind of general malaise. I just didn't feel well. And since I was a little girl, I was always considered stubborn, and that stubbornness kind of helped me out as I got older, because I started looking for alternatives. And those alternatives eventually brought me, it took about 15 years. It took 5 years of being a patient of chemotherapy, 13 years of pulsated prednisone and all kinds of other medications. And also on the side, trying things out of books. I mean, I would buy a book, I would try a recipe. I didn't understand how to mix herbs and how to cook herbs. And I really didn't know what I was doing. But in that time, it kept awakening in me this curiosity, this intrinsic curiosity that there has to be something else. This cannot be the only way. And I refused to live like this. So in 2004, I had a small bowel resective surgery, which was kind of like a rebirth for me. I went into this surgery to save, they decided that to keep me alive, I needed to have this surgery. I was quickly falling apart. And my family was very afraid that this was, she's going to die on the table, or she's going to come out of this and be, forever, handicapped. And I was like, no, I'm going to come out of this, and I'm going to clean my system out of pharmaceuticals, and I'm going to find a better way. And so I went into my surgery with a very strong intention, a little bit of fear, but mostly intention. I came out of it. I was at OHSU in Portland, Oregon. I had a wonderful surgeon. She was kind of famous around the country for this particular small bowel resective surgery. And I came out of the surgery feeling pretty decent after I got home. It was like 2 weeks, and decided that I was done with pharmaceuticals. Well, my doctors felt otherwise. And the doctors and the nurses that I saw, it's like, we can't treat you if you don't take the meds. And now we want you to take a new type of chemotherapy for you, which is pretty standard drug, but not for Crohn's disease, and self-inject it subcutaneously every week for the rest of your life. I was like, you've lost your mind. I'm not doing that. Well, over the next 3 months, it was kind of like fear. It was a fear-based prognosis. I was doing a lot of follow-up, and those follow-ups, the doctor kept telling me, she's like, this is all we know. And if you don't stay on top of this, the scar tissue, the potential, your body wants to be sick. I mean, it was opposite of what really innately felt correct to me. And so finally I gave in. I said, fine, I will take the drug. And it was one of the saddest days of my life. I learned how to give myself a shot, and how to dispose of a needle, and how to deal with a pharmacist and throw it. I mean, all of it. And I was really discouraged. I was going back in for more ultrasounds because of pain, and hoping that it was my ovaries, or hoping it was my liver, or hoping it was a different organ. But nope, just looks like you've got excessive, swelling from this disease. So I tried finally the drug. And I spent the next month, I took it weekly every Monday, and I immediately had vertigo, migraines, nausea. My hair started falling out in handfuls, and I wanted to kill myself. I mean, I really was the closest I ever came to suicidal. And I had at the time a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and a husband who traveled for a living internationally, like China. Wow. So that was a big moment for me. And I went back to my doctor and I said, I quit. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to continue to pursue alternative methods. And at that time, my alternative methods were massage, acupuncture, trying to eat well, finding cookbooks which now looking back really weren't the best cookbooks for me, but thinking I was doing the right thing. And she said, well, then I can't be your doctor, because I have no training in this. All I know is to help you through medication. And she was lovely. I didn't blame her. So we said goodbye, and I left. Around that same time, my son was also suffering from a lot of illness, and I won't go into that whole long, sad story, but I needed to find help for both of us now. And so we moved down to Southern California, and now I was in the center of the yoga world. And what I didn't know, I was also kind of in the center of the Ayurveda world for the United States. And I had read about Ayurveda in the Yoga Journal. I had seen some references to Ayurveda, but I couldn't really pronounce it. So, and being, kind of proud, I'm like, well, I can't study something I can't say. And so I really just kind of like kept pushing it to the corner, but yet my eye would always catch it. I'm like, what is that? So finally, I meet a teacher down in San Diego who becomes my yoga teacher. He had been a monk at an ashram for 25 years that was yoga and Ayurvedic based from India to the States. And he became a dear, dear, like soul brother of mine. And he introduced me to an Ayurveda practitioner who I took my son to see. And we both went in there and had a very interesting first visit because it was so different than anything I'd ever done before. It wasn't clinical so much. And what he prescribed and recommended was the first time someone made a difference for my son's life. Wow. So that blew my mind, just blew my mind. And I said, I have to study this. So while I was in yoga training, on like the first week of class, this beautiful woman walks in, and she was the assistant to Deepak Chopra. And she came in to do a talk about Ayurveda. And not only was she like this beautiful speaker and had this incredibly calm soul, she spoke so much sense. And I wrote across my big notebook, this is my future, like, or this is my path or my journey, whatever I wrote. I can't remember now, but I was practicing how to write Ayurveda. I'm like, I have a feeling I'm going to be writing this word a lot. And kind of the rest is history. I went to see her. I started learning with her. And then I joined the Chopra Center and started studying with him. And then I moved to the school Kerala and other teachers. And I just kept going for, well, I still learn. So that changed my life. I learned, it took me a few years to be able to kind of look back and look at the numbers and see the research. I'm like, you know what? I haven't taken any medication for 3 years, now 5 years, now 6 years. And it wasn't until, so that was in 2007 now. So 3 years post-surgery. And then 2014, I got very, very ill. I think it was from asbestos. I was pulling up carpet and remodeling an office space for my Ayurveda clinic that I was opening where I lived back in Southern Washington. And we realized kind of halfway through that this doesn't feel right, like something's not right here. And, you know, even though we were masked, we weren't properly protected. And I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. I mean, it kicked in hard and fast. I had hyperthyroidism through the roof. I was having stroke-like tachycardic events. I was having toxic flushes. I was losing my color vision. It was terrible. And so I went to an institute, a couple different doctors, and I was put on medication and a heart monitor and beta blockers, thyroid medicine, a whole new world. And I was devastated. I'm like, this is literally me going backwards. And so I went to my Ayurvedic doctor on the side, and I said, this is what happened to me. And he said, okay, we can work with this. And he reminded me of the roots of Ayurveda. And he reminded me that Ayurveda doesn't treat the disease, it treats the human. It treats the person who is suffering from the disease. So all three of us could have Graves' disease, but we could all three be treated very differently. And so it took about 6 months of me really sticking with these herbs and then eventually weaning off all pharmaceuticals. And I, once again, was completely healed. My hormones were back to normal. My thyroid functioning was probably better than it had been before. And I was taken off all the medicine, or I took myself off with my doctor, and continued to this day without pharmaceuticals. So that's kind of my testament to Ayurveda. I'm not saying that happens to everyone because it can be integrated, but I have learned that when you stick with it and you're with someone that understands how it works, that you really can bring your body back to balance and homeostasis in a natural way. Sometimes with support from pharmaceuticals, but oftentimes you can then stick with the Ayurvedic world and slowly, which is the goal, remove yourself and wean yourself off of other medications. So that's how I got to Ayurveda. Without telling you what Ayurveda is, that's kind of how I came to find this very old science. And here are just some of my credentials. As I said before, I've done different programs at different schools. I also stay very active with our National Ayurvedic Medical Association, referred to as NAMA, and that is made up of doctors, practitioners, counselors, and students across North America. And we gather annually. I teach some classes for them. I'm constantly learning. The American Herbalist Guild, I've done some teaching for them, and various organizations. And so, during this time, I always stayed with my yoga, and, my yoga practice has changed considerably since I started. And Ayurveda and yoga are sister sciences. So if you were to visit India, or you were to go through training, like a really classic training in Ayurveda, in yoga in India, similar to how I was trained in San Diego, you would be trained in at least elementary style level in Ayurvedic medicine, because historically, going back over 5,000 years, they were always together. You learned the movements, you learn the breath, you understand the energy bodies, the vortexes, the chakras, just like you understand herbs and food and circadian rhythms and things of that nature. They're all connected. And that's just a little bit more about just some of my teaching. I've also done teaching for yoga teacher training programs. Other people wanting to become yoga teachers, I love to do that. A PACE provider for NAMA. So when people are getting education, continuing education credits, some of my courses have been accredited for those courses. And I currently live in Bellingham. I think that said White Salmon, but I'm in Bellingham, Washington, which is between Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia, on the water. So that takes us to Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is a word that if you break it down into two parts, it's much easier to understand. Ayur and Veda. So Ayur translates, and so the Sanskrit is considered the oldest written language in the world. And Sanskrit is the language that Ayurvedic science and medicine, these long texts of books were originally written in 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and then translated to Latin, translated to German, to Russian, to English, and various languages from there. So these words are often words from Sanskrit that are also the base of Latin words, which is really fun if you're a language person, or if you have any type of interest in the ancient world. It's really exciting, and I'll try to remember in this presentation to show you a few examples if I can remember. But Ayur means life. And Veda, simply like in a without going through a paragraph, oftentimes when you translate from Sanskrit to English, there's not word for word. And that's why in Ayurveda, we will still use some of the Sanskrit words. It's not because we're trying to be snobby and like, oh, I know these words. It's because there really isn't another word to use. And so sometimes a paragraph of English will be enough to explain a word in Ayurveda, for example. So Ayur means life and Veda means science. It's the science of life. Veda is often sometimes referred to or translated to the word wisdom. So regardless if it's science or it's wisdom, it's still like understanding life. And it recognizes that humans are a part of the universe. We look up, we see stars, we see trees, mountains, grasses, plants, animals, rocks. All of it is connected, and it's all created from this big bang that happened, so many years ago, and eventually broke into these 5 elements. And the elements that we're speaking of are earth, as in the matter, like the heaviness of the earth, water, fire, air, and ethers, or space. And these 5 elements combine and they form 3 vital energies. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as humors, behaviors, or doshas. And dosha is the word I'll be using here, and that is most commonly used in Ayurveda. And over the past, 10, 15 years, as Ayurveda has really picked up steam, you might see more, a hair shampoo or something in a magazine or on Oprah, like, what's your dosha? And people start kind of throwing this word around, which is kind of humorous. It's slightly used correctly, but oftentimes not so much. You're not your dosha. You're made up of 3 doshas. So the doshas are what create our unique personality, our traits, our funny little idiosyncrasies, little things that we do that maybe our sister, brother, parents, son, or daughter does or does not do, because we carry them in common. And they also, going back thousands of years, when these doshas were started to be used to describe people and things, it's kind of like DNA. And so when we study now someone's dosha, and then maybe they have some DNA testing, the dosha will give us some ideas of which systems in the body might be at risk, which systems might be stronger, just like DNA does. So it's really interesting how these ancient sages and wise men and women understood the human body before we had the tools that we have today. These 3 doshas help us to describe everything in the universe. So the first dosha, so there's 3 of them. And so I'll start with the first one. The first dosha is called Vata, which is often sometimes referred to as wind. It's not quite accurate, but it's a really great way to explain it when it's elementary and basic levels. So it works beautifully. And this is the dosha that combines the 2 elements of ether, or space, and air. So if you just had ether and there was nothing else, just space, it would just be stagnant and almost something that we can't even see or feel or taste or understand or hear. But as soon as there's movement behind it, you have wind. And that movement is what is in charge of everything in the universe, everything within our body, because this dosha, this humor, this behavior is responsible for anything that has to do with movement. And that movement can mean walking. It can be moving our arms. It can be shaking our head. It can also be swallowing, digesting in the way that we swallow food, breathing, defecating, urinating, menstruating. Everything requires movement in our body, circulation through our heart, the oxygen transfer, carbon dioxide. This is all governed by vata energy. And there's sub-doshas and all these sub-classifications, but for today, we're just going to keep it really simple. So responsible for movement, and it also governs our sensory and our mental balance, our adaptability, and our comprehension. So vata, in translating this Ayurvedic understanding or terminology to the body, you could say that it's very connected to our nervous system, and the nerves are where everything is coming from the brain to all parts of our body. When we're talking about doshas and a personality, and the way we learn this, by the way, is when you work with a counselor or a practitioner or a doctor of Ayurveda, there's many different tools. One of the simplest tools and most detailed it's a questionnaire. And so we ask you a lot of questions. And these are questions that are personality test type questions. They're about your digestion, about your sleep, about your skin, your hair, your nails, your sex drive, how you handle stress, how you enjoy life. There's a lot of levels to these questions. It's not just a quick answer type thing. But when you then do the numbers at the end, and I say to you, oh, you have a lot of vata energy. So I was like, well, what does that mean? Well, you're probably a bit quick moving, like you do your things kind of quickly. People may refer to you as a bit of a hummingbird. Maybe you're kind of quick as a rabbit, the way you move from point A to point B. People that have vata energy or a lot of predominant vata energy in them happen to be typically more artistic. They have a lot of creative ideas. They're in their head. They're in the clouds. You kind of need to hold them back down. I joke that for me, I have a lot of vata energy, if you can't tell. I feel like I keep rocks in my pocket, literally. So there are times I'm heading out or I'm getting on stage and I feel like I'm about to lose my footing because I'm so hyped up, full of air. I fill my pockets with rocks, and I'm always collecting rocks since I was probably 3 years old. And I had no idea what this was back then. So when you're in balance and you have a lot of vata energy, you're energetic, you're creative, you're flexible, you move really easily. Your mind can quickly go from one thing to the other without feeling overwhelmed. But what happens is you can get overly aggravated in any dosha, in all doshas. And when that's out of balance, then that's when you feel anxiety. You might feel tachycardia or palpitations in the chest. You can't sleep because the mind just can't come down. Your skin dries out, your hair dries out. Maybe you're constipated. You're not having normal, regular, timely bowel movements, which can then lead to irritation in the GI tract, which can then affect your brain, your nervous system, and can create mental disorders, pain, and arthritis. So it's all connected. Vata dosha is also considered the king dosha. So even though we have 3 doshas and everyone's made up of these three energetics, the vata is the most important one. And if it is not it's not grounded and it's not in balance, then it can pull the other 2 out. It's like how you have a braid, you pull one parts of the hair braid and they all kind of mess up a little bit. When vata gets pushed out of place, too much travel, irregular meals, too much dry food, too many cold drinks, I can go into more of that later, then you start to find these issues, and they start small and then they build. So that's a little overview of vata dosha.
Nice.
Pitta. So pitta dosha is, it's the blend of the 2 elements of fire and water. And this is the energy that is behind and responsible for transformation, digestion, metabolism, and how we perceive things. So I didn't get into organs of action before, but it's great in Pitta to talk about. There's organs that are related to each of the doshas, and in Pitta, organs of action and also sensory organs. So our eyes are the organs that are attached to the energy of pitta. And the way to kind of think about that is when we look at something, you know, our eyes reverse the image. It's a lot about light, like a camera, and it transforms that image into something we can understand in this human concept that we've created. And that is a full energetic from fire and water as the doshas behind them energetically. When we eat food and we taste the food on our tongue, we swallow, goes to the esophagus, to the stomach. We have different acids that are being produced from our organs, depending on what food is coming in to balance and to break down that food. That is an action of the pitta dosha. People that have, so again, like going back to that evaluation that you might take to figure out what's my dosha, and you're not your dosha, but what's my most predominant top two, people that are pitta types, because personality is a huge part of this, tend to be very passionate, motivated, driven. They're perfectionists. Career-wise, they tend to be CEOs of companies, emergency room doctors, colonels in the military, pilots, to give you some examples. So typically people that it requires you to show up, do the job, take control without burning out. They're the people that you know that burn out, because you're like, man, if she doesn't slow down one of these days, she's just going to burn up. And those are pretty much your pitta people. They tend to have blue eyes, not always, but it is a strong trait in pitta. And when they're out of balance, it can manifest, all of them can manifest to the point of death or to just a really big inconvenience. So, you know, there's a whole level of things are a little out of control. I've got some red blemishes in my skin. I have some acid reflux. My heart doesn't, I have kind of this chest pain that I can't tell if it's food related or if it's stress related. Inflamed skin, boils, eczema that just is less itchy and more painful. These are all, and a fiery temper. That's a very important one. People that have a predominant dosha of pitta tend to be more the blamers. It's not usually their fault when something goes wrong. It's usually someone else's fault. And that's pretty standard. So pitta is a very important dosha, just as vata is, and it's anything that's changing. So it changes food into nutrients. It changes food into waste. It changes how we see things. It helps propel us through the earth and moves us from point A to point B, because the movement and the fire come together to kind of create this energy behind us as humans and in our brain. And then we have kapha. So I like to tell the story, or to tell the fact that in Tibetan medicine, and Tibetan medicine is an offshoot of Ayurveda, similar to Chinese medicine, but Chinese medicine has much more of its own culture in it. And whereas Tibetan and Ayurveda have more crossover, they use vata and pitta for the same things, but their word for kapha is phlegm. And I love that, because I don't love the word, but I love it because you immediately like, oh, I know what that looks like, or that feels like, or that stickiness. And so kapha is that lubrication, that substance that provides support in our body, in our physical body, and also in our in the personality of who we are, our emotional body. It is the combination of the elements, earth and water. So if you think of like a pond, if you think of a muddy bog, you know, that's an extreme example, but it's kind of sticky. When you have a cough that's productive and you're spitting up a lot of gunk, that's excessive kapha in the body. That's a blend of these two elements that need to be cleared out or dried out. And so this dosha is responsible, as I said, for lubrication, stability, emotional support, and more positive emotions. So kapha types are your friends and maybe your great aunt or your grandmother who's just sweet and loving, maybe a little larger, and gives really good, big, buxomy hugs, stays pretty gentle and calm personality, maybe has soft, cool skin. You know, they're just these patient, lovely people. They're the kind of people you want running your doctor's office in the back end. Like, they're keeping everything together. They're someone you want in your family to make sure everyone gets a good meal every day and gets hugged and kissed and read stories at night. Because the vata is too busy doing 15 projects. The pitta is out working. And then you want but again, these are kind of generalizations, but the kapha is that like sweet, I always think of like the sweet grandma. However, too much kapha, too aggravated of kapha manifests as a lot of mucus in the body, water retention, the digestion slowing way down. And part of that can be behavioral, because people with a kapha predominants tend to eat the same foods. They tend to eat blander foods. They tend to have a slower digestion because they get into these ruts. Think about sticky oatmeal every morning, no spice person. Like, you're like, really, how do you eat that? People do, and people love it, but over time it's not good for them because they're getting too much of that sticky stuff in their system and not enough fire to break it down. Lung and sinus congestion is also a sign of accumulation or aggravation of the kapha dosha. Being sleepy, lethargic, kind of losing your joie de vivre, like you just don't feel like doing anything, and depression. So depression is also a sign of a kapha imbalance. Whereas vata, it's more anxiety. It's more that high amped. Pitta, it's more like anger and frustration and loss of control. And kapha, it's more just this dark hole you can't pull yourself out of. So coming back to what I said at the very beginning about Ayurveda, which is so important, and I repeat this a lot, is that Ayurveda science, Ayurvedic medicine is not about treating the disease. It does help treat disease, but it does so by treating the individual. And once you bring an individual into their balance, then these different issues that can happen because of doshas being out of balance find themselves falling back into balance with herbs, daily routines, different modalities of healing. And so when we talk about dosha, it is describing the imbalance. So when someone says, oh, I took one of those tests and I'm a pitta, no, you're not. You have 3, but the one that comes up the top is going to be the one that you have to watch the most, because that means it's the one that's going to first probably go out of balance. Now, different things can you can be a strong kapha oriented person and fly halfway around the world and not have time to deal with jet lag and not eat proper foods and have a stressful event, and you have a vata imbalance, even though you're a person who has a predominant dosha of kapha. So I hope that makes sense. So it's activities, it's what we ingest, it's how our senses are nourished or malnourished, as which of these doshas is going to be in balance or out of balance, because they are representing the energy, and everything that we are is made up of energy. So when we look at life and how to help people through Ayurvedic medicine, we're looking at how to heal mind, body, and soul. It is not just physiology. It's not just, curing an ulcer or fixing a headache. It is really getting into finding out what at the deep levels are going on and causing these imbalances. And 2 of our most important vital bodily functions are breathing and eating. So nourishment comes from converting energy and information of our environment into the intelligent body. And so in order to maintain a healthy body and a healthy physiological unit here, this container that all this fluid is floating around in, and these bones and muscles and tendons and such and organs, then we need food that's good for us and that actually nourishes us. We need to have our digestion, our digestive system at its optimal strength when possible, so we can actually break down that food properly. And we're absorbing what we need, and we're not keeping what we don't. What happens when we don't properly break down food, when we don't separate out the toxins from the nutrition, is they can all get jumbled up. The toxins can get stored, attached to these little fat molecules. They find places to hide within the body. And over time, they can leak out. They can create a leaky gut. They can cause a microbiome and microfilm, which messes with our microbiome, which then attacks the nervous system. And there's complete breakdown. And when we have breakdown, that means our elimination is not efficient. That means that our ability to create new cells, because we're constantly creating new cells, new skin, new liver, everything is being regrown. If we're not eating properly and digesting properly and absorbing properly and eliminating properly, then those new cells are not going to be as strong as they could. And that's how we can begin a new disease process. So Agni is everything. Agni is another beautiful Sanskrit word that's kind of hard to fit into an English box. It is actually in the base of the word ignite. That can kind of give you some idea. So Agni is everything, and it helps us to ignite our digestion. And Agni is the word that we use to explain the fire, proverbial fire within us that breaks down what I was just talking about. So how we consume and digest our food. But what a lot of people don't really think about is we're not just digesting food, like actual food or actual drinks. We're also digesting anything that we take in as input into our five senses. And Ayurveda respects these senses that we have, sight and sound and taste and touch. And when we don't honor that, when we don't really put much thought into how our senses are creating our mind, then all kinds of havoc can happen. If our Agni isn't strong, then it isn't able to break down not just the food, the calories, the fat, the amino acids, things of that nature, but also break down trauma, break down things that we've seen that maybe really affected us. Like, how do we handle what we just heard or saw or read or felt, pain that our body just experienced, whatever it is. It's constantly creating the mind, which creates and influences our personality. So this physical digestion is also the digestion of our life. And so Agni is a big part of what we look at as Ayurvedic practitioners, and try to explain to our clients, our patients, on understanding how to stoke this Agni, this inner fire. And it's done through proper digestion, which is often has to be, sometimes we have to make changes on how we eat, when we eat, what we're doing when we're eating. Sometimes we need some herbs to help to move things along or to slow things down if we have too fast of a digestion. Sometimes we need to eliminate certain foods and increase other foods to find that balance to where we're feeling that we can handle whatever's thrown at us. So when we talk about Agni, it's digestion, it's trying to prevent toxicity. When we talk about toxicity in Ayurveda, another big word that we use oftentimes is ama, and that's this word AMA. And it's another word that's kind of, there's not just one word in English that explains ama. That's why we hold on to this word. And so ama is whatever we aren't digesting in our body, it's still around there somewhere. So let's say you're not properly breaking down your food. Where does all that stuff go? And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it can attach to fat molecules. It can bury itself in the lining of your intestines. It can get stuck in areas around your stomach and in different valve locations where suddenly there might be some fermentation around that, or there might be other abnormal cells that start to attach to these toxins. That, let's say you eat some food, you've been constipated, you haven't had a decent bowel movement in a few days, you just ate a bunch of junk food, then you got on an airplane, and you drank too much alcohol, then too much coffee. I mean, it can happen so fast. And so then it takes that much time and then some to bring yourself back to balance, but we still have to deal with what just happened. It doesn't just fix itself overnight. And so ama can show up in many ways. Physically, it can show up as coating on our tongue. We promote tongue scraping in Ayurveda. It looks like a little horseshoe made out of copper or silver that you take from the very back of your tongue near your tonsils, or where tonsils may have been in the past, and you bring it forward onto the tip of your tongue and rinse under hot water, and you do that until it's clear. If you start doing that every day, you'll notice over time there may be less and less of that buildup on your tongue. And that is a representation, and it's good information for a practitioner. It's like, oh, you have ama in the body, because the first place it shows up is on your tongue. And what happens is it interrupts the communication between your brain and your digestion. So if the brain doesn't know, if you just put sweet, sour, salty, or whatever you on your tongue, how's it going to tell your intestines what to do and how to break down the food? So tongue scraping is a way to start the process of clearing ama. Ama can also present itself with brain fog. It can present itself in constipation, bad breath, low energy, just feeling malaise. And that can often mean, it may not mean you're sick. It just means you got a bunch of junk in you that needs to come out. And we can do that by gentle cleanses, incorporating different herbal formulas, some teas and things like that. And often it can be done, in less than a month with things that you have in your kitchen. So it's not necessarily very complicated. So as I was mentioning ama and the tongue and the different tastes and whether or not there is any taste coming through, we have 6 tastes that everything in Ayurveda is kind of based on, as far as our pharmacology or herbology, and how we look at the makeup of digestion in the body. And those 6 tastes are, as listed in front of you: sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. And those tastes are different combinations of the elements. So we have different, and we also have different temperatures of post-digestion in the body, which is kind of complicated. And I won't get into it too much right now because it's usually a head scratcher and not enough time to explain. But when we're working with someone and we understand their dosha and how their digestion is working or not working optimally, we want to then balance it out. So for instance, someone has a fiery personality, they have a fiery digestion, they eat hot foods, possibly. They might eat kind of fast. They might eat on the run, reading the news while they're walking and chasing it with an espresso. And then they wonder why. They're like, oh, then they take a Tums or whatever. And, we all know these people, right? Or at least somebody in your life, if not yourself, has been through this at some point. And so in this case, there's too much heat coming from their actions, their activities, and the food they're eating. So what we would do in Ayurveda is like, okay, well, we need to counter that. What's the opposite of hot and salty? Well, bitter and astringent and a little bit sweet. And so we would then find herbs that are, and these different tastes are different combinations of space, air, fire, water, earth. And so we're looking to find the opposite qualities. So it gets kind of fun. I mean, it really is once I started as a student in Ayurveda, but my very first homework, the first week, was I had to memorize a mantra and sing it, which was terrifying for me. But it was a mantra that we used to honor Ayurveda. And it was to start identifying everything around us on what the predominant dosha and what the 6 tastes or elements would be of that, from a tree to a mountain to my kid to the food on my plate. I mean, to where everything I was walking around scratching my head going, will that be salt? Would that be air? Or is that water? I don't know. Now it's just like knowing my ABCs. And sometimes I have to think twice, but this is how we break things down and how we treat the person and not the disease. So let's say both of you came to me with the exact same, and that's fine. You can leave it there, Elizabeth. If you both came to me with the exact same complaint, I would most likely not treat you exactly the same way. You might both get an herb that on first glance looks exactly the same, but Elizabeth's might have something a little less fiery in it, and Sherry's might have a little bit more fire in it, but yet it's going to have the same outcome for both of you because it's balancing what's out of balance, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So the 6 tastes, and these are really important because these tastes, they're not just the taste and how our tongue touches them and how we enjoy our food. It's way deeper than that, because these tastes oftentimes are things that we don't even consciously notice or know about, especially in herbs. But these tastes also build and create who we are. So the sweet taste, which you'll find kind of in some things that are obvious, it's not always obvious to people what these flavors are, but it is our most nutritive. It is what we build our cell tissue. And when we're rebuilding after convalescence, we want to have these tastes. This does not mean cinnamon rolls and chocolate chip cookies, just to be clear. It is more of our grains, dairy, pasta, starchy vegetables, nuts, most of our oils, sugar in its raw forms, maple syrup, sugar, honey, and also meats and animal products. So cheeses and, like I said, and dairy. So we don't often think of those as tasting sweet the way we perceive sweet, but it's the elemental makeup that's predominant in those. And then what it takes in our physical body to digest and break down those flavors or that taste. And I will also say with these 6, as I'm going through these 6, it's recommended in Ayurvedic nutrition and cooking that we incorporate all 6 of these tastes when possible in our meals. And sometimes it can just be a tea. Sometimes it's putting sea salt on our food to get the salt. So it doesn't have to be complicated. The sour taste is represented, well, it promotes our appetite and digestion. So think about yogurt is my favorite one too. And some of these have crossover where they'll have more than one category. So yogurt is an example of something sour that helps promote digestion, especially if it's good yogurt that's made with, a really good starter that isn't full of artificial flavors. We're not talking Yoplait here. We're talking about yogurt the way yogurt was thought about thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, versus out of your supermarket so much. Anything citrus, pickles, vinegar, alcohol, and your drier cheeses. So that is also, all of these are important. Salty is where we get some of our laxative effect, and also helping to rehydrate, because we are made up so much of water, which is not pure water. It has a salt content. It has more of a sedating property to it. Not that it makes you sleepy, but it's just part of the elements we need so that our body can relax. Promotes digestion also, and can be found in salts, meats, sauces, oftentimes, because there's often salts added to sauces. So sometimes we have to keep that in mind. And seafood, anything that comes out of the sea, the ocean, is considered salty. The other three tastes are pungent, which is what we will take in the form of like hot peppers, ginger, which is one of our favorite foods, favorite things in all of Ayurveda. Cloves, mustard, thyme, basil, for example, are considered pungent herbs in this example. And this helps to clear congestion. So when I was talking about that phlegm from kapha, you've got, a sinus head, you've got, you're spitting up or trying to get all this mucus out of your system. You may read or see different things in magazines about how to do this naturally. And often ginger and clove are two of the main things you read about, because they help to promote this ability for us to get the stuff out of our system, to liquefy and blow it out, spit it out, whatever we need to do. So stimulating digestion, clearing congestion. We don't need a whole lot of pungent. It's usually used in very small amounts, unless you're a pitta person that likes to just eat hot peppers all the time. Number 5 is bitter. So the bitter is our anti-inflammatory and detoxifying. So where sweet helps build you up, bitter helps break you back down, which when we're in a detox mode or just general cleansing, keeping the body balanced, we need all 6 of these tastes, because all 6 of these actions, or all of these actions, are required to find homeostasis in our digestion. And what you'll find with Ayurveda is the word digestion is used over and over and over again, because we're constantly, that's what we're doing. We're 24/7 digesting, assimilating, eliminating, and then we rebuild back up. It's like the universe was created, sustained, and then it starts to fall apart again. And then we build back up. And that's what's happening with our cells. It's what's happening with everything in our body. So these bitter flavors come from our green leafy vegetables, our green leaf and yellow vegetables. It's in not as many things. So the bitter and astringent are kind of more vegetable and unique foods. Astringent is your compacting and healing actions. And we have that through legumes, beans, legumes, lentils. Split mung beans are one of our favorite beans that we use a lot of in Ayurveda for digestion, because they're so easy to digest for most people, not everybody. Green tea and teas are considered astringent. So I was saying before, if you're like, well, I have this great dinner, but I forgot astringent, well, throw in a little green tea, or put in some dark greens on the top of your plate. It's you can add these tastes pretty simply. Same with the bitter, always having something like a fresh green with your meal, some arugula, just to give you that bitter flavor, so that there is the breakdown and not just the building up. We want both.
Nice.
So in Ayurveda, we have guidelines for nourishment. And I love these because they both seem obvious, but they're also but they also are super effective. And the first one is don't eat unless you're hungry. Grazing is such a thing, especially, COVID and working from home. It's like, oh, just around the corner in my kitchen I have. So trying to really create time between your meals, having your largest meal at midday or lunch is ideal. Your second largest meal, breakfast, and your lightest meal being dinner. So not so much the American way, but the way that gives your body the most time to have to break down the foods. And so by doing these fasts between and not eating all day long is much healthier for us and gives the body time to assimilate. Eating in moderation, not eating to the point where you're stuffed or full, ideally at 70%, you're like, I feel like I can maybe eat a little bit more, but I'm going to wait. And usually that wait is the time that your body's like, oh yeah, I'm in a good place. I don't need more food. Eating fresh, local, organic when possible. People ask me all the time how to do that. Find a farmer. Go to your farmer's market, join a CSA, a consumer supported agriculture group, to where you can eat locally year round. It's one of the healthiest things you can do. We don't have strawberries in December. So don't eat strawberries in December. We don't eat tomatoes in the spring because they don't grow in the spring unless they're shipped from far, far away. They're picked at the wrong time. They're probably sprayed with something. And so if we can really focus on local, then most of the work is done for you. You don't have to think about it so much. We talked about this last week in the podcast. Drink your liquids at room temperature. Ice is not your friend. It really squashes that agni I talked about. It puts out the fire. You can't cook your food if you don't have a fire. And so really trying to eliminate ice when possible. If you're eating 3 meals a day, not everyone does. If you're going to skip one, I recommend you either skip dinner or do a light dinner and have a really nice lunch that's your combination of breakfast and lunch. Eating in a quiet, calm, peaceful environment. Now, that doesn't mean you don't go to a restaurant, but it means that when you're home or you're with people, you're not multitasking. You're not watching Fox News or CNN or reading the paper or walking around your house on the phone, stuffing a sandwich in your mouth, because what's happening is your body is trying to multitask and it doesn't do it well. And so it needs all hands on deck to break down that food and decide what needs to be kept, what needs to be eliminated, and how it's going to be used. So really, and not to mention just that gratitude for your meal, and those few breaths or a prayer or just acknowledgement and gratitude can really go a long way in bringing your nervous system to a place. Because if you think about it, when your stomach's upset, it's you feel it in your nerves. When your nerves are upset, you feel it in your stomach. And so you want that communication to be peaceful. Chew your foods thoroughly. That seems so simple, but how many times do we see people just gobble up the food and swallow? And it's like, that's just making it so much harder on your body to break it down. And it's one thing if you're 12 years old, but if you've been doing this your whole life, then it's a lot of stress on the intestinal tract. Don't eat if you haven't previously digested your last meal. And I find that happens during family visits and holidays. We all stand around the kitchen and we eat. And I'm always like, everybody sit down. Is that cold? Don't pour out the cold water. Let's get some. I'm wanting everyone to feel healthy and not feel sick, but yet sometimes it's nourishing emotionally, but we still want to try to pay attention and not just fall into groupthink. Well, everybody else is doing it. You have to think about yourself, especially during the holidays. Consuming fruit separately from other foods. It's a lot of that has to do with how fast we break the foods down and fermentation in the stomach that we don't want. Make sure you stimulate that agni. One way to stimulate is not drinking ice drinks. One way to help support is with warm or hot water with ginger or lemon. Fennel is a great way to keep that agni strong, ginger specifically. Digestive spices, which is anything from fennel to cumin, coriander, cardamom, ginger, cinnamons, basil, bay leaf. All of these spices help you break down your food, especially the Christmas spices. We think of those Christmas spices that come out this time of year. Those are incredibly good for breaking down and digesting food and not feeling bloated when we eat, like chai tea type of spices. Avoid processed sugary fried foods. Enough said there. And try not to eat when you're upset or you're distracted. So not walking around, and also not sobbing because you just got terrible news. It's a terrible time to take in food. Really finding a place where you feel like, okay, I'm in a good place where my body can focus on eating. And that's one of the most important things. So moving into kind of the last part of my talk is, so along with all of this Ayurvedic medicine, I also found cannabis as a healing modality for my Crohn's disease and other things in my family with cancer and autoimmune diseases and things of that nature, and started making products, salves and tinctures and things like that for my clients, which took me on a whole nother road of learning. And cannabis as medicine became kind of the next piece of next tool in my tool belt, because the more I started learning about herbs, I loved it. All my family and friends going back like 15, 16 years used to get teas and spice blends from me that are probably still sitting in their cabinet because half of them didn't know what to do with them. But I loved mixing stuff. And then I learned about cannabis. I was like, oh, it's a synergetic herb. And I didn't know that. I didn't understand that at first because, when the way we, especially all three of us, I'm sure, first learned about cannabis, it wasn't called cannabis. It was called marijuana or pot or whatever else. And it was only smoked. And then I started learning more and more and more about this herb and seeing the years of history behind it, thousands of years of history. And I realized this is part of Ayurveda too, but nobody's talking about it. So I went on a journey and helped my dad heal from stage 4 metastatic melanoma using Ayurvedic herbs and cannabis oils. And from there, I just kept going. I couldn't be stopped. I was like, well, now the world needs to know about this. One of my favorite quotes that I like to share is when I was doing history of, I'm like, well, where and when and how, because in the United States, and I won't get into history of propaganda, that's a whole nother talk on its own, but it has been stigmatized and criminalized. And when I started doing some homework and going back to before 1930 or the early 1900s, I realized that in India, in China, all over the world, including the United States, it was a very powerful and commonly used ingredient, and usually rarely used on its own. But in India, because where it grows so profusely, to the Hindu, the hemp plant was considered holy. A guardian lies in the marijuana leaf. Its thought-bracing qualities show that it is the home of the great yogi. Its powers give a high place among lucky objects. Oaths are taken on its leaf. Spirit of bong, which is a tea made out of cannabis, is the spirit of freedom and knowledge. It is the cleanser of ignorance. And that was written by the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission in the 1800s. So this is not something just recent. In China in 2400 BC, it was considered the most important pharmaceutical plant for nervousness and anxiety. So this goes back a long time. And this is because we have what's called an endocannabinoid system. And I know you two teach about this a lot, so I'm just going to do a short talk so we can get to Q&A. But this is a network of neuromodulation receptors that's throughout our entire body, quite heavily in our brain, our immune system, down our spine, in our organs, around our cardiac region. And it's a homeostatic regulatory system. It's essential to have this imbalance for the key processes in our brain and body to function. And this is when we talk about our endocannabinoid system, it's responsible for two basic activities. You could kind of narrow it down. I mean, we could talk all day. We could write a book. I have books, a whole shelf of books that are 500 pages long about what it does. But basically, it modulates pleasure, energy, and well-being. That's one kind of part of it. And it slowly nudges the body back to health in the face of disease or after an injury. You know, it's not like a quick fix. It's something that takes some time, but it basically brings us back, like Ayurvedic and getting the doshas back into balance to help find homeostasis. Mm-hmm. And it's an established fact in science that cannabinoids, those are the molecules, that's what makes up the plant, and other components of cannabis can modulate many physiological systems in our brain and body. They trigger, these cannabinoids are chemical compounds, and they can trigger these receptors. These receptors, it's like a lock and key system that when we take in cannabinoids from the plant, there's like this amazing communication that happens within our body that's been going on for a very long time. So we do make cannabinoids on our own, but not very much and not very often. The first time we receive these is in breast milk, and then we tend to be deficient. And so the human clearly has evolved with this plant. We have records of this going back so many thousands of years now, because this was our balancer. This was kind of like what grew and what we could find to bring us back to how kind of like manufacture spec, like being a baby again. The two main molecules are THC, as most people know, which is the more psychoactive of the two, and CBD. But there's, you know, over 100, maybe even 200 now. I've lost count. So our endocannabinoid system is an essential system. It's kind of I look at it as it's your main electrical source for the body. Like, you know, you think about in your town where you have the main tower that if it gets hit by a plane, everybody loses power. That's kind of the ECS. It's like the big dog up here that's protecting your home system and all the lights and everything in your house to work. So it's your nervous system, it's your cardiac system, it's your digestive system. Every system has an influence by the endocannabinoid system. And what it's there for is to help find balance. So here's this word again, homeostasis. Throughout, you know, everything we do in Ayurvedic medicine and in cannabis medicine is finding homeostasis, which goes back to like 7th grade science. And so pain, reward is not, you know, reward is within our body, like how our body is supported or not supported, how our mitochondrial, how our cells are being developed, the activity that's going on within our body, our mood, how our memory, our appetite, all of that is supported and affected by our endocannabinoid system. The two molecules, as I mentioned before, that we have endogenously that come naturally in our body are called anandamide, which I love this because anandamide is a Sanskrit-based word. And in Sanskrit, ananda is bliss. And so it's the bliss molecule. It kind of makes us feel good. And then the 2-AG is, I can never pronounce that, so I'm not going to make you guys suffer. And so these two molecules that bind are what we naturally would make, but because we don't the way we should, most of us, the plant helps support us and bring that balance through the phytocannabinoid system. And those receptors I mentioned, so we have two different types of receptors, and we'll probably learn that we have more than even that, CB1 and CB2, and they both have communication with THC and CBD, and they're throughout the body. So as you can see, the 1 receptors, brain, liver, lungs, heart, pancreas, endocrine, all throughout those systems. And the CB2, those lock and key receptors are in our heart, pancreas, spleen, liver, bones, muscle, lymphatic system. So basically they're everywhere. All those little dots in there, that orange and red, that's what that was. So terpenes is one of my favorite things about cannabis and plants in general. It's what got me focused on and studying the chemistry of essential oils years ago, and started teaching and working with essential oils, because it's the terpenes, which are I like to call the personality of a plant. So, every plant has a molecular fingerprint, and that gives it its unique scent, its characteristics. It's how you can explain, a rose or lavender or basil or a banana. It has these different constituents that make it unique. And certain terpenes in nature are associated with a boost in the well-being in the human body, in the human mind. So, for example, the sweet floral scent of the terpene linalool, which is in lavender, we now know, and we've known this for years in Ayurveda and in Western herbalism and Chinese medicine, that it helps people feel more calm. It helps you just feel kind of at ease and at peace. Now we study these things under a microscope, and research is showing us, oh, it really does work. It does. Limonene is found in citrus fruits, and it has a mood elevating. And when you cut into a lemon or a lime, orange or grapefruit, and you smell it, you can't really help but smile. Like, oh, that smells so fresh and bright. And pinene, found in the forest, and sage and in conifers, can help increase our alertness. And there's reasons why these terpenes are in these plants, which is another conversation, which is fascinating, on how plants communicate in nature. So benefits of terpenes, and the reason I talk about terpenes here is because cannabis has all of these terpenes in different combinations and different ratios. And so depending on the cultivar of your strain or cultivar of your plant, you might have a plant that has a lot of pinene in it, and it has more of that uplifting and clear-headedness. Or it might have myrcene, which is a little bit more sleepy, like comes like in hops and mango, for example, and that might help you more for the sedative effect, or the linalool from lavender. So understanding the plant cannabis and knowing, ideally, if you have a good farmer who tells you and they test it properly, then you know what is better for you versus what might be more aggravating for you. So they're found in various compositions, and these terpenes have anti-inflammatory effects on our body, antifungal, antispasmodic, antibacterial, analgesic, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. So why do they matter? For example, here's cannabis and clove bud, a comparison. So beta-caryophyllene is one of the predominant terpenes in clove. It also can be one of the terpenes in certain cannabis strains. And when I'm working with people that need to have high anxiety, let's say their vata is really aggravated, and we're working on changing some of their daily routines. Maybe we're adding in a different food, subtracting a food, and also adding in some cannabis CBD therapy. We'll look for one that has beta-caryophyllene in it, because I don't want to give this person something that's going to overly stimulate them. It's just going to add to the problem. It has analgesic qualities. When I'm working with people with cancer and that have pain, I always make sure we have beta-caryophyllene in their formulas if possible. And of course, the anti-inflammatory and antidepressive, which is always lovely to add that into. So each of these are different depending on the plant. I'll just touch on this quickly. Cannabis dosing and titration, as most of you or many of you probably know, know, there's different ways that you can ingest this. Smoking, vaping smoking has always been the classic way, but there's, reasons why not to do that for lung health. It doesn't always have as long lasting of an effect for people that really need a more therapeutic, long lasting effect, or their lungs can't handle it. Tinctures, which are my favorite, are you typically put into an oil base, put underneath the tongue. You hold it for 45 seconds and swallow it. You may feel feel the effects of that within 45 minutes or so, sometimes an hour. But it's a nice because you can dose small, and depending on its CBD or THC dominant, anywhere from 5 milligrams to 20 milligrams is kind of where a nice place to start. But everyone is very different, and I don't even like to give those numbers because I don't like to generalize this, but that's just giving you some idea of numbers. You don't start with 100 milligrams of THC. That would put somebody over. Even 20 would be a lot. 10 is too many for some. And so just to give you some ideas of numbers if this is brand new to you. And then edibles, I always kind of tell people be careful with edibles. Most of us know at least one person that went to a party and ate a brownie and felt nothing, and so they ate another brownie and they were green sick for days. So it takes a while. It's a different digestive process. It comes on more strong. It can take an hour and a half before you notice something. So I really don't love people working with edibles until they have some experience and they have a really good idea of how they react with cannabis, because I never want people to have a bad experience and then not touch it again. I'm like, no, but it's really good medicine when it's good medicine. And so like I mentioned, I used to make my own products, which I loved doing. It was super creative, but I have since decided that teaching and counseling is where I want to put my time and effort. And I met Elisabeth and Sherry and saw, oh my God, I absolutely love that you have Ayurvedic formulated cannabis products. It's like it was a dream come true. So we found each other, and now the only company I recommend and who I have on my website is Bloom Hemp. So I'm super excited to be a part of this this new endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. Gosh, thank you, Joe.
Wow, that was amazing.
That was really good.
Time there. All right, not bad.
A couple more. You want to wrap up a couple more slides, and then we can go back?
Okay.
Yeah, we just have a couple. So we're gonna, before we get to Q&A, and we do have someone that raised their hands, I do want to do a poll first. My first poll I'm going to ask is, do you incorporate Ayurvedic principles into your health and wellness regimen currently today? So yes, no, I don't know. So some people that are new to this may be doing things that are Ayurvedic based, but don't even know it. So there we go. Okay. We got 75% of the people that asked. I'll hit publish results. So yes, 3 out of 3. That's pretty good. Okay. And let me do the next poll, and then we'll do the published results. Why isn't that publishing? Okay, there you go. Published result. And then the next one is back to list. Okay. Are you interested in having a support group or regular meetings about incorporating Ayurveda into your life? Yes, no, I'll have to think about it. So yeah. So just because we're thinking of maybe in the future, somehow bringing Joe on board and having her, because this is a really important concept. It does go along with cannabis education, goes along with the biopsychosocial, spiritual aspects of healing, goes along with cannabis nursing. So we're always looking for tips, tricks, hugs, and nugs. Okay, good. So people said yes.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah, good, because we want to do it.
Yeah, because we want to do it. I think it's just it's another missing link to the whole cannabis picture, and it kind of brings it. We talk about spiritual principles, we talk about mental and emotional, but the Ayurveda really kind of hones in on it in just a different way and adds a whole layer, I think, of a whole another layer of comprehension for how we can incorporate cannabis as medicine.
Yeah, and we never think of cannabis as the be-all end-all, right? It needs to be synergized with all kinds of different things, and Ayurvedic is definitely one. So, most of you found us through the network, but in case anybody is new and watching this for the first time, please join. It's a free network. We have a free introduction to cannabis program, as well as ABCs of CBD, which are the building blocks to understanding plant medicine. We have a free patient portal to chat with your peers, a medical cannabis guide. Just sign up for our newsletter. and monthly clinical conversations, what we are doing right now. We have patient programs, provider training and mentoring programs, and then a free nurse line on top of it, 970-404-HOPE, to triage all care.
Yep. And so just again, for people that are new, Scope and Standards of Nursing is available, co-published by the American Cannabis Nurses Association. This is really important. And I'm not sure if people have realized this, but cannabis nursing has been recognized as a specialty. Elisabeth's programs are written about, and her book is actually written about in the Scope and Standards. And we are rewriting our programs to align with Scope and Standards of Cannabis Nursing. So if you haven't gotten the book, get the book today. And then this is Elisabeth's book, Cannabis for Health, Become a Coach. Elisabeth wrote this book in 2020.
Yeah, April of 2020, it was published.
And then the book became her programs. And these are the programs here that we have available. Free Intro to Cannabis course, free ABCs of CBD, Cannabis Nurse Health Coach Certificate Program for 30 CEUs, Global Clinicians Program that was written for actually clinicians across the entire globe. Nurses can take it as well. Psychedelics for Mental Health and Well-Being is an online program that Elisabeth and I wrote together, which is really amazing. And then the Wellness Coach Program. All of these are available for continuing education credits.
And the continuing education, just a quick mention, is for nurses. So credentialed with the Board of Registered Nursing here in California.
And then we have
symptom-targeted learning for people that are struggling with each one of those conditions, or clinicians who work in these fields like cancer and pain and neurodegenerative, aging, etc.
And then finally, we have Bloom Hemp CBD. What makes us different? Well, now we have an Ayurvedic practitioner, counselor on board that's supporting us as well. So they are USDA organic hemp CBD, woman and nurse owned, doctor and nurse formulated, symptom targeted formula. We have the free ABCs of CBD that goes with it, free nurse line, free care plan, free network, affiliate, wholesale, and retail opportunities. So if you're new to CBD and you're watching this for the first time, we invite you to go to the care plan link there. Just click on the link and you can fill out the care plan. You can say that you heard Joe speak, and Joe could actually do your care plan for you if she wanted to with her links as well. So take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, and if you're watching this remotely and you don't know, all you got to do is take your camera and scan that and it'll go right to the website.
Go right to the website as well. And then finally, subscribe to our award-winning podcast, Hope, Inspiration, Growth, and Healing. We are on YouTube, but we're also on Red Coral Universe, which is very, very excited. We did get syndicated, and this will be on there.
Yay.
We're here to educate and empower patients to make choices that are best for them. We're also here to decrease stigma around what it means to feel good and be high. Hence the H for hope, I for inspiration, G for growth, and H for healing. The Green Nurse is a holistic cannabis nurse that teaches on the endocannabinoid system and the safe utilization of cannabis and other progressive tools to help people reach a better quality of life.
I was cannabis agnostic for many, many years. And the more research I did, the more I discovered that cannabis is this amazing medicine.
I was told that I had a 4-stage pancreatic cancer. The doctor really told me he couldn't do anything else. He gave me her name and she called me and she came to my house. She started to give me cannabis. My oncologist was puzzled because he couldn't find the cancer anymore.
All of the learning that we get comes from the Green Nurses group, comes from their support, comes from their guidance. I trust everything that she says.
Simply meet people where they're at. The plant doesn't, stress to grow, so we don't stress to share it. We're healing people.
Cannabis has been used as a medicine for tens upon thousands of years. Here's the big message. Cannabis needs to be federally legal. We need to have laws that are the same across all 50 states that allow access to anyone and everyone who wants to utilize this powerful medicine.